Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back for another session. This is DRM Unfiltered, the podcast that dares to go beyond the buzzwords. We're going to have a bold conversation today with our expert, and this conversation is going to revolve around transforming capital program delivery from real Primavera breakthrough to game-changing strategies and success stories. We're going to serve up some unfiltered insights that fuel innovation and inspire the future of project controls. No fluff, no filters, just the voices shaping tomorrow. We got Garrett Hartley back with us again for another episode. Garrett, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction?
Hey, good morning, Dan. Good to see you again, bud. Garrett Hurley. I work in our construction and engineering practice within Oracle. I oversee our product marketing for effectively our Primavera product line. So always great to see you. And yeah, with casual Fridays, I have a collared shirt on, which is amazing for me, and usually I'm in a ball cap, so we're just gonna be a little bit more informal today than typical, but we'll get it done.
Hey, you know what? That's not a problem. We've talked about, do you make this a fireside chat or do you make it like a Whiskey Wednesday session?
Hey, yeah, it's a little early for that, but maybe later.
So today's session, we're going to call it from P6 to OPC, evolution or disruption. Today's session, we're going to take on a pivotal question as organizations move from P6 to OPC. And are we witnessing a natural evolution or a disruption shift that redefines project controls? We'll explore what this transition means for scheduling, integration, enterprise performance. We're going to hear from Garrett today, who's navigated both of these worlds in all essence. And the big question, is OPC the next logical step in the Primavera journey, or does it challenge the very foundation of how we deliver complex programs? By the end of this conversation, our hope is that our audience will walk away with unfiltered insights to help you, the client, decide whether to move from P6 to OPC. Is it an evolution or is it a disruption? So with that, we'll get started. So my first question to you, Garrett, is how would you define the shift from P6 to Oracle Primavera Cloud? Do you think it is a natural evolution or is it a disruptive leap?
Well, it's somewhat in the eye of the beholder. I think that is just the reality of it. I mean, in truth, we obviously, as a technology company, are continually looking for ways that we can advance what our products do for customers. And I think a natural progression for the tech has been obviously a move from on-premise systems into cloud systems. And one of the things that we were really focused on when we were engineering Oracle Primavera Cloud, which is a completely different product than P6, was to take all the DNA of what we had in P6 and move all that intellectual capital into a more modern, tech, environment and experience. It's easier for folks to be able to pick up than P6. It's important to note that P6 isn't going anywhere. And we have a very dedicated and loyal following of P6, and that's great. And if folks are happy in it, they should stick with it. We're happy to have them there. But the evolution as far as the progression of where is tech going to slowly move to, and where are we doing with Oracle Primavera Cloud that can help future-proof more of what folks are going to be looking for in their planning and scheduling practice is certainly where a lot of our investment is going to continue to go. And we'll get into more questions, I'm sure, around some of the architecture and things that are a little different between these two systems. But it's important to also understand that these two things are engineered to work together. So you could be you could have elements of your planning and scheduling core practice in OPC. You could have elements of it in P6, and they can share information, between those two environments. So that's true for a lot of folks that are also playing this paradigm between, being compliant with what an owner specification might be and a delivery team, a general contractor or subcontractor that wants to take advantage of, some of the new capabilities that we have inside Oracle Primavera Cloud, but still needs to be in compliance with contracts and their customers that might still use P6. And that's great, and that's okay. And we have engineered these two systems to essentially run side by side. So Whether or not the transition is something that folks really want to do and evolve their schedule practice, and what I just think of as like future proofing it, is these tech jumps are certainly things that are going to continue to happen. I'm not saying that we're going to be rewriting what we're doing in Oracle Primavera Cloud anytime soon, but it is where a lot of the bulk of our investment in the future of that tech is going to continue to move, specifically around things like AI and all the other investments that Oracle is making in AI and all the things that sort of have to happen below the waterline. I think of it kind of like an iceberg. Most folks interact with our applications at the above the iceberg level in a user experience, but there's a whole bunch of really interesting and fascinating and important things that happen below the waterline to make AI and those systems become more intuitive and work. So all of our things around our infrastructure and Oracle Cloud Infrastructure or OCI, how we optimize the database, how we, are building agents to be able to, be agents that we build out or agents that ultimately customers might be able to even build out. So it's a pretty exciting future of where those things are go. But there's things that we've been able to do in Oracle Primavera Cloud that we would never be able to do in P6. So, but it's just a fielder's choice, in my view. Certain projects and types of projects might be well suited or perfectly suited to continue to run in P6. But if there are advantages of ways you want to extend P6 with things like task management, or maybe it's risk management, or maybe you're an owner and it's around portfolio management and capital planning, those are components of Oracle Primavera Cloud that you can extend with P6 versus just having to pick up your entire planning and scheduling practice and think about having it be like a rip and replace, of moving to something new. So it's very customer dependent. We've got, several that are sitting in this what I just refer to as like straddling the fence for a certain period of time where you're maybe letting specific projects run their course in P6 and you're thinking about starting net new ones in Oracle Primavera Cloud. We have some customers that have just said, we're ready to make the move and we just want to transition all of it, and we can help you with that too. And certainly, all of our partners, like what happens at DRM Unfiltered, like you guys have a lot of experience in being able to help customers make that same transition. So completely customer dependent. We're not trying to come up with a hard and fast rule to say that disruption event or treating it like a disruption event is required. It's not required. You could stay in P6 if you're happy there. That's great. And we're happy with that you're there. But if you were looking at future proofing where you wanted your planning and scheduling practice to go, certainly Oracle Primavera Cloud is worth taking a peek at.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned it in our prior sessions, and obviously you mentioned it as well too, that OPC wasn't built as a replacement tool for P6. And a lot of the questions that I hear from different people are, what do you associate as the different strategic purposes of OPC versus P6?
So right out of the gate, I mean, one of the more important aspects of it is that Oracle Primavera Cloud was engineered as a full cloud SaaS application. And that is not what we originally did with P6, where its DNA was focused more on essentially being an on-premise, located on a central server. You run all that infrastructure. You essentially create, what you want that environment to look like, depending upon what your business needs are. But that transition into the cloud, we also have an option to be able to take that same P6 footprint and you could put it on Oracle infrastructure if you wanted. And we refer to that as P6 SaaS. So you're not changing the user experience of folks that are playing in P6, but how they access it could be through a browser and something that's hosted on Oracle infrastructure. And we have partners that also do this, right? Like you guys have had a hosting environment to be able to take P6 and let customers have that same user experience, but just have a subscription model that lets them access their information in a browser. So there's lots of options in that. I think the question ultimately just boils down to strategically what's important to you. Is getting into a subscription-based model something that's attractive? Is it something that's a directive within your company to try and, move more of your infrastructure into a cloud environment? And if that's true, you have some choices, which is great. You don't have to think about this as being a longer term on-prem, component. I think more and more organizations are starting to see that move to the cloud as being something they strategically want to do. And we're just trying to give you off ramps on which one makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And my next question kind of revolves around a lot of focus that I have with interactions with customers or demos. Um, what features in OPC represent a true innovation compared to P6? And I'll give a couple of them, but I'll let you kind of define it yourself. I talk about the scenarios. I talk about the workspaces versus databases. Obviously, the communication of items that they have in OPC to me is really, really huge because I kind of feel like it has that social media type of flavor to it.
Yeah, architecturally they're pretty different. So, and what do I mean by that? Well, maybe I'll just try and explain a little bit more about what some of these components are. So the DNA, the underlying DNA on how the calculations run between Oracle Primavera Cloud and P6 is exactly the same. So we're not changing essentially how the CPM algorithm has consistently been set up and run. That has been, a trusted, known, you know, algorithm for decades. However, when we were engineering Oracle Primavera Cloud way back when, one of the things we were interested in trying to make sure we could do with it was make it more than just scheduling. And while scheduling is still the core of what we do, there were additional components that we had acquired over time, things like risk management, or when you were talking about that net new innovation on where we were seeing the evolution of scheduling move, where now including more folks that are closer to the work on the job site, whatever is being built, have access to a system that they could get involved in planning and controls. So we refer to that whole module as task management, and it's pretty closely aligned to what the Lean Construction Institute's, last planner methodology. So a lighter weight, easier experience for folks to think about digital planning and short interval planning in a again a cloud environment where you can have multiple users all bang away on that stuff at the exact same time. And you're taking an analog process that typically is involved in the trailer and bringing it into an environment where you could, essentially put it on a mobile device or a tablet and be able to walk out to the job site and be able to progress the work that you do. And I think that was a real it was I wouldn't say a criticism, but it was a reality for a lot of organizations out there that felt as though trying to get P6 in the hands of the field wasn't necessarily an always easy thing to do. So it was one of those considerations when we were setting the system up was what additional components or capabilities could we bring to the planning and scheduling, again, that future of planning and scheduling, and sort of seeing the traditional critical path method uh, office scheduling get more tightly aligned and integrated structurally with what the field team typically does in job site production with tasks. So we've structurally built these two things to happen in the exact same house. I can build out a contract master schedule and I can build out a field team production schedule. And I can structurally tie those two things together in the exact same system. That's new. That's something that we don't offer inside P6 natively. So that whole component of getting, collaborative planning, connected scheduling, structurally connected scheduling, where you have an office team and a field team working off of essentially one unified plan, is very unique to Oracle Primavera Cloud. And the other components that we sort of also wrapped in to just put more value in the same box was we have all this risk management capability. And I think originally most folks still think of us, and it's great that they still think of us this way. On our risk tools tended to be more on the analytics side. So it didn't necessarily have a way of handling where I think a lot of organizations still run, their risk management, identification, register, you know, their response plans, their monitoring, tend to still be in things like Excel. So we've taken essentially the Project Management Institute's six-step best practice risk management framework, and we've baked it right into Oracle Primavera Cloud. So a lot of the processes that might have happened within Excel, you can now do directly inside the system. And when you need to tie a risk event directly to the schedule, it's right there and easy to connect. So no additional third-party tool, no additional import or export of anything or way that you need to figure out that integration. We just baked it all right in. And then the last one is for the owners that are out there that are looking to be able to try and figure out essentially their initial problem of like, what are the right projects to even do with capital planning, whether that is a capital plan or an operational OpEx plan or a blended CapEx OpEx plan. How do you put that portfolio of work together? And then immediately, once you figured out how you're going to do the right projects, how do you move it into a how do we do projects right? Within building those, actual detailed plans and schedules out inside an environment that you also don't have to leave. So that's been great for a lot of owners to be able to just think of that process as being completely handled from ideation, meaning requests for projects that they typically deal with. If I'm in the capital planning team, I have all these requests that are coming in for funding, like which projects we're ultimately going to decide to do, whether those are CapEx projects or OpEx projects. Go through the prioritization and selection of getting to the right, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, plan, and then moving those projects right into, the more detailed planning and scheduling when you're including delivery teams or additional departments to be able to detail all that stuff out for execution. So all of that stuff, capital planning, portfolio management, all the risk management, all the task management, all your core planning and scheduling, all that's available inside OPC today. So we weren't just trying to figure out how to replicate exactly what P6 was doing. I think any compelling reason to think of this transition ideally has to come from a standpoint of, well, what other value do I get? What other things are going to be in that box that I can do more of or extend than I currently have today? So I like thinking of it in that, how am I going to continually future-proof, what my planning and scheduling practice is allowing me to do? I want to cover all the things that I do in core planning and scheduling, but I can do more. I have more options, more capabilities that are also available inside OPC than we're ever going to have in P6.
And that's great. And you mentioned something earlier about having, big Oracle behind it and AI. So some of the things that we always talk about is, does OPC offer better support for mobile capabilities, real-time collaboration, and maybe expand on those AI-driven insights that you had mentioned earlier?
Sure. So, yep, both P6 and OPC have a mobile option. Uh, there's ways for folks that are out there on a job site to be able to access the work and their work assignments directly through, their phone or a tablet. That's been true for a long, long time. We had slightly different names for like in P6 that was referred to as like progress reporter or progress update. We have a mobile app associated with OPC. Same sort of concept is to try and take work assignments and get them in the hands of the folks that are in the field so they can easily go through and update progress on their work assignments. That's also very closely tied into our task management module of how a lot of folks do this within the lean world. In the lean world, it's essentially a digital card wall. How do you get those cards directly down onto a device that I'm walking around the job site with, that I can also interact with, either taking a photo and being able to capture what's happening on it, be able to add a discussion, start talking to other people. That's the sort of social environment you were discussing, is we have, the framework of what we've built into OPC makes that collaboration and again, connecting what the office team and the field team might be needing to share as far as information. We're trying to make that whole process easier. And then there are certain elements of this that I know you just described as well, and I'll hit on it because I just love our rethink of it is, in the traditional P6 world, there's that whole concept of a baseline. And how we handled baselines and how we handle a progress update used to be something referred to as a reflection, which is kind of a fancy way of saying we're building a copy of a project and we're letting someone access that copy of the project, go through and complete their update. And then as they send it back to me, I have a choice to be able to recognize the components that might have changed within that progress update. And then I essentially merge it together. That same concept of how we want to handle baseline updates, baseline creations, we refer to in OPC as scenarios. So you build a scenario, you share that scenario with whoever is doing the update cycle. They go through and enter in the component changes that happen on the update. And I have a way of being able to run a side-by-side comparison when I decide I want to merge those files together. It's a much simpler process, a cleaner process in OPC than it is in P6. I think it's a lot more detailed as well on us being able to figure out, because tends to be a challenge for a lot of progress updates, is exactly what changed, who made those changes and what those changes mean. Since if we don't like what happened during a specific update, I might be selectively merging in components that are coming from different contractors or subcontractors, but it's not done until we kind of have it nice and clean the way that we want it before we decide we want to create a new baseline and how we go through and roll up our reporting. So that whole process of scenario management, way more flexible in Oracle Primavera Cloud. That whole process of merging and understanding what happens on a schedule update and being able to see the details of it, way easier to interrogate in Oracle Primavera Cloud to get to that reporting. So a lot more powerful, flexible, but powerful. And that's an important process that I think is a real pain for a lot of folks that are out there, because obviously an update sounds like an easy thing to do, but there's a lot of complexity associated with deciding exactly what you want to have go into that current file. So it's a nice clean version of what those options are that everyone gets a chance to see and agree to before you merge everything. And when you merge it, to go through that same event again on creating a new baseline, which is that rolling history of exactly how the performance on the project is run. So it's a great point, and it's one of those process areas that we spent a lot of time re-engineering. We didn't want to just replicate exactly what we had done in P6 originally. We really looked at it intensively and said, how do we make this easier to understand? How do we make it easier for folks to go through that whole progress update process and streamline it? So if you haven't seen it, it's definitely one of those things to check out because it's different.
Do you, are there currently, or maybe in the works, any type of AI that's going to be worked into or baked into OPC? I know I've heard stories of what I'm going to call it's called Ask Oracle, but I call it the 2025 version of the 1990s version of Ask Jeeves.
Great question. So there is a ton of AI investment, more broadly happening across Oracle, from our infrastructure to optimizing the database with something we refer to as 23 AI database, our 23 AI database version, which has a lot of optimization performance stuff into it. The whole below the waterline work that happens in being able to build out agentic AI and generative AI. But there's a few things in the application that folks are going to see in pretty short order. I can't give you specific dates on that part for the roadmap, but I can tell you that it's close. It's very close, and it looks rad. So what is it? What are the things that we're doing? There's two major things that are going to drop, fairly quickly. One of them is just an additional help assistant that will contextually understand the pages that we're on as I'm a user in the system and the types of questions that I'm typically trying to ask using natural language against that system. So a lot of our current help environment, references our documentation, but it's harder to navigate. If you're a self-starter and you love going through all the documentation, which we have very rich documentation on, how things work within the system. But for a lot of folks that are just trying to get to quick, easy functions or quick answers to questions, that assistant is going to be far more efficient than, having to generate a ticket to try and engage with someone, in our support system. So it'll be faster. I think it's an agent that I think is going to provide a ton of value. The other places that we're going to be looking at use cases are around things like, RFPs. So I'm a general contractor. Let's say I'm a general contractor and I consume a series of RFPs. We'll let you consume an RFP and we'll let it go through an AI process to help you generate your first version of that schedule. All the way from here's the recommended WBS that we think you should be thinking through. Here's the activities. Here's the sequences. Here's some of the durations. So just consuming that RFP and reading what's in the RFP and getting to that first, straw man of a schedule, that whole process is something that we're soon to release. And I'm excited about that. I think that's going to provide a lot of value for folks that are just trying to figure out how to build a meaningful project shell to get going. And then obviously, enrich that, add to it to get it to exactly what you need, provided you're going to, chase that award. So just that whole concept of how do we help you get information put into the system? Because I think those tend to be the pains for a lot of folks is right. Creating the actual schedule takes a series of time. And if we can accelerate that time so that you can get to a better version of that quality schedule up front, then great. You can respond to RFPs faster. You might have a chance to even win more awards with capabilities like that. So those are things that I'm excited about. And then obviously we'll be adding additional agents over time that are more functional, meaning that if there's specific things I'm trying to do, within the system to be able to automate more, I think it's going to become a lot more of that frontier is pretty fascinating on the number of use cases that could be available to us. From, hey, help me get through a progress update, or I've gone through a progress update and I'm looking for recommendations on what I should do. Should I be adding resources to this schedule? Should I be, changing logic ties to the schedule? Where should I be changing logic ties to that schedule? Should I be putting risks into that schedule, or risk events have started to happen? And what would that mean as far as my cost and schedule impacts? Which activities should I be focusing my time and attention on? What sort of decisions am I going to try and need to make that would get me to that quality plan on what we do for the reportings and the roll-ups? So there'll be a lot more that will happen on that. But those are just two areas that I think are going to be, quick, easy, types of runs for returns. The agent that would be sitting inside there to help you get to answers to questions that you have using natural language. And then our RFP, consumption and help you get through that first, version of your schedule creation. Those are the two things that we're working on right now, with a whole bunch of other fun stuff that we'll be able to talk about in future pods.
Sounds good. Perfect. Now, you and I both being seasoned users of P6, do you see or are there any capabilities that seasoned users like ourselves feel are missing or less intuitive in OPC?
So there are some things, the list of things that our P6 environment and our OPC environment, can do side by side. You know, there is a parity component between those two things, right? There's some things that OPC doesn't have that P6 has, like expenses or steps. So all of those things are still, elements of our roadmap where we're looking at those parity components based upon customer feedback, like who's really using what's of these components. And is there another way to be able to think about how we might handle people using expenses for essentially cost management, high level cost management? Is that something that we want to replicate, or is there something that we want to do differently in making it just as easy for those cost components to live against the schedule? So and we have a pretty exhaustive list of putting these things directly side by side. Any customer that is interested in making this transition, we essentially just go through an assessment process and we evaluate what your current P6 environment is using and not using. And we give you a list of, well, here's the components of what we think this stuff is you need to land in that transition if you want to be able to migrate the data. And in some cases, depending upon what the needs for those things are, it might mean we're just going to keep running some of these things in P6, which is completely fine. But that list of components between those two of, does this store have all the things that this other store has is remarkably small now. I would say that gap between those two things, experiences or capabilities that users really wanted in P6 and loved in P6 and were looking for in OPC, we've continually shrunk that list, down over the last 5 years. So that gap continues to close. There are differences between those two. It is important to understand those things, but that's why we have this assessment process. We have a formal assessment that we walk through with you to help understand exactly what your environment in P6 is using and not using. We give recommendations on exactly what this will look like inside OPC. And we help build a bridge and a map for exactly what that transition, should do for you whenever you're ready to do it. So exhaustive, but we do have a plan. I think that's the hard part for a lot of folks. The same thing was true, and Dan, you lived through this with me too, is even that move from P3 to P6 was, well, wait a minute, am I going to I use these components, is this going to still be there? Is it going to operate the same way? I know we've talked about this in the past, but I like to think of it as a lot of the time it's just a transition from being in one store where I know where everything is and I've memorized the whole thing like by the back of my hand. I know exactly how to navigate, be efficient getting in and out of that store. And it's not that we don't have all the same things in this other new store, but where those things are in the store might be a little different. So do I still have milk over here? Do I still have milk over here? The answer is generally yes. But where it is in P6 would be on aisle 2, and where it is in OPC might be in aisle 4. So it's just a matter of learning what that new store's navigation looks like. And once folks go through that, position and they get comfortable within that new store, I can tell you everyone that's run through that transition component, doesn't want to go back. But rebuilding that mental map is a human thing, and it does take time and it does take training, and it don't feel like folks have to do this thing alone. Even though I think that's the way you and I tended to learn a lot of these things, was sort of get thrown, here's your copy of P6, go figure this out without a whole lot of extra training or help. And we did it, but it doesn't mean it was the smartest way to do it. It's always great to be able to have additional services and components to help, and that's exactly why we have partners. And to be able to help with those transitions, we've got a pretty well-baked. This should be the plan, and this is actually where the pain is. The pain is, how do we help you, learn how to navigate that new store and be just as efficient as you always were over in P6. It just takes a little bit of time to get you there. Interestingly enough, new users is a completely different debate. So it takes a lot more time for folks that are in our traditional P6 cohort, moving into OPC, than it does for a net new user to pick up OPC versus P6. It is faster. We have seen that data to be faster to pick up OPC as a new user than it is for a new user to try and pick up P6. That's exciting to me, because we're also trying to figure out how to way to, again, in that longer term vision of what we're trying to provide is, I want a planning and scheduling platform that is just as approachable for beginners as it is for experts. I want a planning and scheduling platform that is just as good at handling large projects as it is at handling small projects. And that is the truth for most organizations that are out there. I think what we're trying to limit is this whole, I bought something and then I've graduated in capability, and do I have to buy another thing to keep going? So I'm a new user and I'm just getting into planning and scheduling. You can come into OPC, you can have an environment that looks and feels, a lot easier than it is in P6. And when you need more, you don't ever have to leave to get more. And that's been interesting to watch in the market, is we have, a lot of folks that might be coming from, a different planning and scheduling tool. That could be something like a Microsoft project. And that transition of being able to move into an environment where you're handling maybe smaller, simpler projects in something like a Microsoft project, and maybe more complicated projects in P6. In OPC, you could aggregate all that stuff and all those users into one spot, which to me is fascinating. And that's actually the place that most organizations want to go. How do I get all my hands around every single project that we do, regardless of whether or not, those projects are small and simple or large and complex? How do I get all of my users into an environment where we can collaboratively build schedules together, whether those are small projects or they're beginner users, or they're large projects and they're expert users? So that continuum of folks, to me, is the important part to try and figure out, right? If you're going to make planning and scheduling last and become a better discipline and a practice, you've got to let people mature, through their stages of learning. And I'm excited about that with OPC, because we do have a spot for beginners to get in and be happy and get, and be efficient. And we have a place for folks that have been longtime P6 experts that are looking for that richness of feature capability, and that's all there too. And they don't ever have to leave.
Yeah, you really hit on a point that I'm going to say is close to home. We brought on somebody new, and with that person, their goal was to learn both OPC and P6. And in doing so, their thought was learning OPC was so much easier than learning P6. They're still learning P6. I mean, P6 is a monster. We both know that. But to be able to get in and start utilizing OPC, it was a much quicker transition for that person who came from outside the industry and really didn't know anything about scheduling and planning.
Yeah, I mean, adoption is a real thing, right? I mean, one of the reasons why P6 eventually got such a loyal following is that, it works. It works on great, on bigger, complicated projects. If you're managing larger programs and projects, it's fantastic at that. That has always been its value, its strength. You're running something big and complicated, it's a 900-pound gorilla. You need something that can handle all that complexity, is configurable, gives you great answers to questions that you run on jobs all the time. It's phenomenal at that. And we've worked really hard to try and make sure that that same sort of experience is available inside OPC. Like I said, the DNA on how we run the algorithms between those components is exactly the same. They're engineered off the same essential DNA.
Mhm.
We haven't changed any of that. So but a cloud environment, as you were mentioning, sometimes maybe it's just something people feel a little bit more natural and they should be easier applications to use. And and that's good, right? The way that you bring more people in is you got to have an experience that lets beginners get there and be comfortable and mature. And I agree, I agree that planning and scheduling as a discipline is something that I would love for organizations to continue to invest in. There's a very big difference between being a good planner and being a good scheduler. And ideally, you want both. So that's the fun part. The other thing, bringing it back to the AI component, right? We are in an industry where we have so much intellectual capital that is going to be retiring out. And to me, that is one of the places where AI can provide a lot of value, where we can take all of the things that people know and be able to institutionalize that, into the system, where when you're asking questions on how to be able to resolve certain things that might happen on a progress update, what would you recommend? That you could take all the learning of what's happened on past projects and be able to bring that forward. There's really kind of two times that I think of those AI components being really valuable. One is when I'm building things, like starting out building the frame or the schedule. A great schedule, if you build a good plan, jobs tend to run smoother. If you build a crappy plan, jobs will feel difficult. But if you can help you get to a good quality plan up front, technically we would hope that the running of that project should be a little bit smoother, but entropy is entropy. Things are going to come up. And the other time where I'm going to be looking for answers to questions is when the job is in flight and I'm come up against some sort of type of a change or a scenario in that change, and I want a recommendation on what I should do. And to me, this is what's great about AI is it's basically like taking all the things that our people might know and we can put it into the system and we can have it basically operate like a recon team that you never have to feed, that you never have to pay, and is just running around in the database looking for questions and answers for you. And it's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like to me, that's an exciting way to be able to think about ways that automation and that assistance can get better and better and better. So those are the sorts of fun parts in the questions that we're going to be automating more of helping you get to what those changes mean, helping you understand what those changes mean, helping you make decisions on that data, helping you understand how to keep the project, on its track for cost and schedule, which is really what everyone wants at the end of the day.
Awesome, awesome. So come down to the conclusion, and we'll call this the final verdict. In your opinion, is OPC the future of project controls or just one path among many?
Well, I do think it is one path among many. That everyone's timing on what they want to do and why they want to do it, will be a little bit different. But I think we have some proof now that the market is ready for what I'll just think of as like a jump the shark moment. Some of the top tier organizations in the world, whether those are general contractors or some of the largest owners, have started to make this transition. And to me, that's sort of where the proof is. So, we just this week, just on Tuesday, got authorized for being listed on FedRAMP's in process. So OPC is going to be moving through the FedRAMP authorization, and that authorization, is still going to take months to complete, but we are currently listed as in process. For owners out there, whether you're a government agency or you're looking for a high compliance type of environment based upon the sensitivity of the work that you do, that's big. Um, we spent a lot of time, getting to this point, but I think that is going to change a lot of market behavior. Since if you think of the largest DOE programs in the world, or the DoD projects in the world, or sensitive infrastructure, work, a FedRAMP authorized, environment where you can do everything, and we're not taking components of OPC's module and going through this process. Everything inside OPC is going to get the FedRAMP authorization. The portfolio management and capital planning, the core around planning and scheduling, all the task management, all the risk management, all the resource management, all of that stuff is going to go through the authorization. So that's exciting. And then, yeah, I think, we've seen over the last quarter, the last several quarters, large general contractors, within the top 20, top 15, top 10 that have looked at what they want their futures to be in planning and scheduling and have made this transition or are in the process of making this transition from P6 to OPC. So it's not what, we might want necessarily. I mean, I would love for everyone to get into OPC because I think it's great, but I also love P6. So it's a great problem to have, in one way. But it really boils down to where do folks want to be able to think about future-proofing, their planning and scheduling practice? Do they want to do more than just planning and scheduling? Are they interested in being able to take advantage of ways to integrate more risk management into what happens during planning and scheduling, which I think is important and is valuable? That's all there. I think getting the field teams and the office teams connected onto one structurally unified plan is a game changer, irrespective of what we're making. Just the fact that we can have people that are closer to the work, more involved in planning the work, to me is the right way to go. And an Oracle Primavera Cloud, has all of that structural connection, built in and is ready to go. So I think the proof positive is that we're actually seeing, customers do it, are prioritizing those transitions and have seen, their aha moment of, what, this is exactly where we want to go. These are where we want our investments to go. This is how we want to run our jobs. This is how we want to be able to build better partnerships. This is more valuable to us. We get more data and information out of it. We can more seamlessly make decisions on this kind of stuff. We're more efficient. Whatever those core reasons are for every individual organization, I think, there's proof now. I think there's proof now just in the market. And some of the fastest growing segments, to me, the more exciting part isn't just what's happening at the top end of the market, because obviously everybody kind of keeps tabs on what those folks are always doing, right? What are the big boys doing? And should we be following what the big boys are doing? But it's the mid-market, which is the majority of engineering and construction companies. Companies that are in that kind of like 50 million to maybe 250 million sort of size that have always looked at Primavera as maybe being a heavier tool or a heavier experience. If you were just thinking about us as traditionally in P6 and maybe thought, well, you know what? I don't have enough big projects to be able to justify wanting to go and push everything, into P6 and running all of my stuff in P6. But with OPC, that's been different. Our mid-market segment has been the fastest growing segment in our business, which is again proof that I think we're doing the right things. We are creating experiences, we're putting more value into that system for mid-market organizations to run their companies with all projects. And then mid-market companies, obviously, as you continue to think of it as a futuring your growth and how you want to be able to handle that growth, it's something that can scale with you, which to me is also really exciting. So some of it is just the nature of here's the folks that have gone through to make this transition that I think are going to actually move the market. And the mid-market has been a really fascinating expansion, but the top end of the market is also where I get more excited because, man, when the big boys look at the stuff and they go, okay, it's ready, it's there, we're doing it. Um, uh, that's exciting, right? We've been on those waves before. You and I have seen those waves before. It's how you and I, came up on this through P3 and how P3 matured into P6 and how P6 has matured into OPC. You know, I think the future is bright, and I'm uh I'm excited to be here to paddle into another one because that wave is happening right now.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fun series doing it with you. I really appreciate you sitting down. Hopefully, we can come up with some more topics to do down the road. And any closing statement you'd like to make?
Oh, Dan, I'm so grateful for, your partnership and your time and attention in this. DRM McNatty does such incredible work, as far as a implementation and services partner and, folks that are close to customers and, been in this business forever. And if you're an organization out there that has sat through, any of these debates and these discussions, make sure you're picking up the phone and calling them to be able to learn a little bit more about what your options are. The great news is there is choice. And if you're interested in being able to think about what that future, move inside OPC could potentially do for you, you're at no better place than the guys that are on the phone with us right now. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come in here and chat with you. It's always great to see you and look forward to more of these, bud.
All right. Thanks a lot, Garrett. And we'll be, I'm sure we'll be seeing your face again sometime soon.
We'll be out there.